from Witch Hut whispers. The air in the plains village felt heavy, not with humidity, but with an unspoken dread. Kael, a seasoned wanderer whose boots had trod every biome from sun-scorched deserts to frost-nipped tundras, had felt such atmospheres before. It was a scent of fear, thick and clinging, like the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. He approached the market square, a place usually bustling with the rhythmic clatter of emeralds, changing hands and the guttural grunts of negotiation. Today, however, a hushed quiet lay over it. Villagers huddled in small groups, their usually jovial faces etched with worry. Their arms were crossed, their noses twitching, their eyes darting towards the east. Kael observed them carefully. They barely noticed his arrival, so consumed were they by their anxiety. One particular villager, a farmer known for his robust trade in wheat, stood apart, his skin pallid, a strange, faint shimmer clinging to his form. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, and his wide, vacant eyes seemed fixed on some distant, unseen point. Other villagers recoiled slightly when he moved too close, a silent accusation in their avoidance. Kael's gaze followed the farmer's unnerving stare, past the distant tree line, to where the emerald green plains began to give way to the murky depths of a swamp. There, barely visible above the twisted roots and dark water, a small, hunched structure stood, its chimney emitting a faint, sickly green wisp of smoke. The whispers, Kael now understood, weren't just the rustling of leaves or the murmuring of villagers. They were the collective, creeping dread emanating from that very hut. Tales had reached him in far-off lands, stories of strange afflictions, of villagers strained of color and vitality, drawn inexplicably towards the swamp, only to return. Different. The source always was pointed at the lone inhabitant of that isolated shack. A witch. Kael spent the fading hours of daylight preparing. He sharpened his diamond sword, honed the edge of his axe, and replenished his quiver with freshly fletched arrows. He crafted a sturdy shield from oak planks and iron ingots, knowing the protection it offered was often the difference between a near miss and a final breath. He cooked a generous supply of pork chops and baked bread, anticipating a long night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, the air grew colder, and the distant croak of swamp frogs began their nightly symphony. Kael slipped quietly from the village, a silhouette against the twilight sky, moving towards the foreboding eastern marshes. The transition from the open plains to the swamp was immediate and jarring. The ground beneath Kael's boots turned soft and squelchy, each step sinking slightly into the murky soil. The air grew thick with the scent of stagnant water and decaying vegetation. Twisted oak trees, their branches draped with long, stringy vines, cast deep, oppressive shadows. Lanterns, hastily crafted and placed by villagers in a futile attempt to deter the darkness, flickered weakly, casting eerie glows on the water's surface. Zombies groaned from unseen recesses, and the skittering of spiders on the mossy roots sent shivers down his spine. Kael moved with practiced stealth, his eyes constantly scanning, his ears alert to every snap of a twig, every splash in the water. Finally, through a dense thicket of tall, reedy grass, Kael saw it clearly. The witch's hut. It was a ramshackle structure of dark oak planks and mossy cobblestone, perched precariously on a small island amidst the dark water. A single, small window glowed with an unsettling purple light, and the green smoke from the chimney now seemed more vibrant, curling into the starless sky like a malevolent spirit. A brewing stand, clearly visible through the window, bubbled and hissed, its contents a kaleidoscope of ominous colors. Around the hut, on lily pads and small muddy banks, several black cats moved with an unnerving grace, their eyes reflecting the purple glow. Kael found a vantage point on a slightly elevated patch of drier land, partially concealed by a dense cluster of sugarcane. He settled in, drawing his spyglass, a rare trinket acquired from a long-forgotten desert temple, and began to observe. The witch herself moved within the hut, a hunched figure in dark robes, her nose long and pointed, her green skin faintly visible in the strange light. She moved with frantic energy, adding ingredients to the brewing stand, stirring potions in cauldrons, and occasionally throwing a small glass vial into the swamp water, which would hiss and fizzle upon impact. Then Kael saw the farmer. The pallid villager from the market square was slowly, inexorably, drawn towards the hut. His movements were still stiff, almost like a puppet on invisible strings. He shuffled through the water, oblivious to the lurking dangers, his eyes fixed on the witch's dwelling. He reached the edge of the small island and slumped against a gnarled tree root, his breathing shallow, his form shimmering more intensely. The witch emerged from the hut. Kael tensed, his hand instinctively going to his sword hilt. She held a large, dark potion, its liquid swirling with an unsettling, viscous consistency. She approached the farmer, who flinched, shrinking back against the root. The witch, however, didn't unleash a malevolent spell. Instead, with a surprising gentleness, she held the potion to the villager's lips. The farmer resisted, turning his head away, a whimper escaping his throat. The witch persisted, her movements conveying a desperate urgency. After a moment, as if a sudden compulsion overtook him, the farmer reluctantly took a hesitant sip. What followed baffled Kael. The shimmers around the farmer's body intensified, almost painfully, and he shuddered violently. Then, slowly, the pallor began to recede. A faint blush of color returned to his cheeks, and the vacant stare in his eyes seemed to dim, replaced by a flicker of awareness, though still tinged with confusion and discomfort. The witch watched him intently, her brow furrowed with concern, not malice. She then pressed a small dried flower into the farmer's hand before retreating back into the hut, leaving the villager to slowly, cautiously, make his way back towards the village. Kael's mind reeled. This was not the curse he had imagined. This was a treatment. The shimmer he had seen on the villager, the pallor, the compulsion. It wasn't a witch's curse. It was a slow, draining affliction, and the witch's potions, despite their terrifying appearance, seemed to be the only thing fighting it. The whispers, born of fear and misunderstanding, had twisted the truth. The witch wasn't afflicting the villagers. She was trying to save them. He now understood the desperate urgency in her movements, the sheer volume of potions she brewed. She was working tirelessly, alone, against an unknown blight that was spreading through the village. The villagers, seeing the frightening effects of her potent remedies, or perhaps the initial worsening symptoms, before the cure took hold, had mistaken her efforts for malevolence. With a new purpose, Kael decided he could not simply observe. He had to help. He silently crept closer to the hut, avoiding the watchful eyes of the black cats. He scanned the surrounding swamp, his eyes now open to patterns he hadn't noticed before. Several spots of discolored water, emitting tiny, almost imperceptible particles, pulse weakly in the murky depths. Zombie pigmen, remnants of nether travel, sometimes appeared near such spots, accompanied by a faint, sickly aura. This was it. A slow, creeping corruption seeping into the water, affecting the villagers. Kael pulled out his pickaxe. He knew what he had to do. He spent the rest of the night carefully locating these corrupted pockets, mining away the tainted blocks, replacing them with clean dirt and stone he carried. He moved with a quiet efficiency, dispatching the occasional drowned or slime that arose from the depths. It was exhausting work, but as the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hues of dawn, the number of pulsating spots dwindled. As the first rays of light touched the swamp, the witch emerged from her hut once more, holding another potion. She seemed to notice the subtle change in the air, the faint lessening of the corruption's influence. Her eyes, usually narrowed in concentration, widened slightly as she scanned the surrounding area. Her gaze fell upon Kael, who stood, weary but resolute, amidst the churned-up earth. She didn't scowl or throw a potion of harming. Instead, a slow, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding forged in the heart of the mistruth. Kael then made his way back to the village, choosing a path that brought him into view of the returning farmer, whose color had significantly improved. The farmer, seeing Kael, gave a small, uncertain nod of recognition. Kael continued on, heading directly for the market square, where a few villagers were tentatively beginning their day. He said nothing, simply removed a shimmering, sickly green block of earth he had mined from the deepest part of the swamp and laid it carefully before them. Then, with a silent gesture towards the distant swamp and a subtle nod towards the farmer who was now almost normal, Kael conveyed the truth. The villagers looked from the block to the farmer, then to Kael, and finally, their fearful eyes turned towards the witch's hut. The whispers would take time to change, Kael knew, but the seeds of understanding had been sown. As Kael quietly prepared to leave the village, his supplies replenished, his adventure complete, he glanced back at the swamp. The green smoke from the witch's hut still curled into the sky, but now, in Kael's mind, it seemed less ominous, less a symbol of dread, and more a sign of tireless, unacknowledged resilience. The whispers, he hoped, would soon tell a different story,